It seems like AI is everywhere these days,
Yeah, it really does.
and for good reason, right?
Yeah.
There are some amazing things happening.
Oh, absolutely incredible advancement.
And today, we are diving deep into one model that's really caught my eye,
Oh, yeah.
DeepSeek R1. And what makes this one so fascinating, especially for business leaders like you listening,
Mm-hmm.
is that DeepSeek is a Chinese AI company.
Okay.
And they were founded by someone who was a really big player in the NVIDIA world.
Interesting. So they've got that hardware background.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they've done something really impressive.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So even with the current restrictions on selling those high-end GPUs to China,
You know,
DeepSeek has built a model that needs way less computing power than
wow.
the competition.
Okay.
And they're getting results that are just as good or even better in some cases.
That's impressive. So less computing power, but equal or better results. How are they doing that?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where does DeepSeek R1's magic lie? What's the secret sauce?
Well, one of the really interesting things about DeepSeek R1 is that they're focusing on reasoning.
Okay.
A lot of language models out there just rely on massive data sets for training.
Right, just feeding them tons of information.
Exactly. But DeepSeek R1 is using reinforcement learning to really hone in on its reasoning skills.
Reinforcement learning. So is that kind of like teaching a dog with treats, like rewarding it for good behavior?
You got it. It's all about giving the model a reward when it reasons correctly.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So basically, it's learning by trial and error and getting rewarded for those aha moments.
Exactly. And those little aha moments really add up.
And speaking of aha moments,
Mm-hmm.
there was this one part in the DeepSeek R1 paper that really blew my mind.
What was that?
The model actually caught its own mistake.
No way.
Yeah, and went back and corrected it.
So it's like it had that moment of, oh, wait, I messed up. Let me fix that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it was reflecting on its own work.
That's pretty amazing. And that's a big part of what sets DeepSeek R1 apart from the others. It's not just memorizing, it's actually learning to think. It's thinking for itself. That's incredible. So how does this all tie back to efficiency? We know it's using less computing power, but how?
Well, that's where the mixture of experts architecture comes in, or MOE for short.
Oh, you got it.
Think of it like a company with all its different departments.
Okay.
You got marketing, finance, engineering,
Right.
each one with its own specialized expertise.
Right, each department has its own role to play.
Exactly. And they all work together to achieve the company's goals.
So how does this relate to DeepSeek R1?
Well, DeepSeek R1 isn't just one giant model.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a collection of these specialized experts.
Interesting.
And each expert is trained on a particular task or data set.
I see. So it's kind of like dividing and conquering.
Precisely. And what's really clever is that for any given task, only the relevant experts are activated.
So it's not wasting energy on things it doesn't need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that dramatically reduces the computational load, making it much faster and cheaper to run. So it's working smarter, not harder. The paper mentioned that DeepSeek R1 activates something like 10 times fewer parameters than those larger models like Llama 3.
Right.
And it does that for every single token prediction.
Yeah, that's a huge saving in terms of compute,
Absolutely. They've also implemented something called low precision training.
which is a fancy way of saying they're using fewer decimal places in their calculations.
Okay, so that speeds things up and uses less computing power, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
And it cuts down on the memory needed as well.
Wow. So they're really hitting efficiency from all angles. And on top of that, they're also using sparse attention techniques.
Yeah, they're really good at focusing on the most important information.
So instead of trying to analyze every single word, it's picking out the key points, kind of like how we skim through a document to get the gist.
That's a great way to put it.
I have to admit, that's my secret weapon for getting through my ever-growing reading list.
I feel that.
But what happens when DeepSeek R1 has to deal with more complex information? Does this approach still hold up?
That's where things get really interesting. This ability to focus on key information actually makes DeepSeek R1 very efficient at handling those long contexts and tackling tasks that require deep analysis.
Like what kind of tests?
Think about things like complex mathematical problems or those challenging coding tasks. It can handle it all.
So we've established that DeepSeek R1 is efficient. It can reason, and it can handle some pretty complex tasks. But for our listeners out there who are business decision makers, what are the real-world implications here? What does this all mean for them?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that DeepSeek R1 is a game changer. It shows us that we don't always need to invest in massive infrastructure to get great results with AI.
So it's opening up the world of AI to businesses of all sizes.
Exactly. And it's also changing the way we think about AI development. It's not just about building the biggest models anymore. It's about building smarter, more efficient models.
And DeepSeek is leading the charge on that front, and they've gone a step further by open sourcing their models, which seems to be pushing other AI labs to innovate and compete.
Oh, absolutely. Open sourcing is a huge deal. It's accelerating progress across the whole field.
This is all incredibly exciting, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Hmm.
We're going to take a deeper look at how DeepSeek R1 actually achieves these impressive results when we come back after the break.
I can't wait to dive in. Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about how DeepSeek R1 is so good at reasoning.
Right, and how incredibly efficient it is.
Exactly. And now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how it actually works.
I'm ready. Let's do it. Give me the technical detail.
Okay, so let's start with how they train the model. DeepSeek R1 uses something called low precision training.
Low precision training,
And specifically, they're using the FP8 data format.
FP8.
It's basically a way of using fewer decimal places in their calculations.
Okay, so less precision in the numbers themselves.
Exactly. And that really speeds up the whole training process.
I can imagine. That's pretty clever.
And they didn't stop there. They actually developed this really innovative training framework.
Oh, wow. Tell me more.
So DeepSeek R1 uses a combination of techniques, pipeline parallelism, expert parallelism, and 0-1 data parallelism.
Okay, I have to admit those sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, they're a mouthful.
Can you break those down for us non-technical folks?
Absolutely. Think of it like a factory assembly line.
Okay, I like that.
So pipeline parallelism is like splitting the model training into different stages,
Okay,
and each stage is handled by a different set of processors all working at the same time.
so it's kind of like parallelizing the workload.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And then you have expert parallelism,
Okay,
which is like having specialized teams within that factory.
so each team is focusing on a specific part of the process.
Right. And in the case of DeepSeek R1, this refers back to that mixture of experts architecture we talked about.
Right, with all those different experts working on different tasks.
Exactly. It's all about dividing and conquering. And finally, you have 0-1 data parallelism.
0-1 data parallelism.
Okay. This one's like having multiple copies of that assembly line all running at the same time, each one working on a different chunk of the data.
So it's like supercharged parallelization.
Exactly. And that makes the training process even faster.
Wow. So they're really using all these different strategies to optimize their training for maximum efficiency.
They are. And the results speak for themselves.
But with all this optimization, how do they make sure that the model doesn't lose accuracy?
That's a great question. They've implemented a couple of techniques to make sure that low precision training doesn't sacrifice accuracy.
Like what?
One key technique is called fine-grained quantization.
Fine-grained quantization.
It's a bit technical, but basically they're grouping and scaling elements in a way that helps to preserve precision even when you have outliers in the data.
Okay, so it's like fine-tuning the process at a really detailed level.
Yeah, it's all about making sure nothing gets lost in translation. They also use something called increased precision accumulation.
So even though they're using fewer decimal places overall, they're still doing some calculations with higher precision.
Exactly. And that helps to make sure the final results are more accurate.
It's impressive how they've managed to balance efficiency and accuracy. But let's talk about memory for a second.
Yeah.
Training a model this big must take a ton of memory.
Oh, it does. And that's another area where DeepSeek has really innovated. They've really optimized the memory footprint of the model.
How so?
They've been really smart about how they store and access data during the training process. They've streamlined the data flow to minimize memory usage.
Just making sure they're not holding on to any unnecessary information.
Right, and they're even using techniques like caching and recomputing certain things in the process to reduce the memory load.
It sounds like they've thought of everything.
Mm.
They've optimized the training process, the memory usage, and even the precision of the calculations. Now, for our business decision makers out there, I think the big question is, how does all this efficiency translate into real-world applications? How does this actually benefit businesses?
That's a great question. And the exciting thing is that DeepSeek R1's efficiency isn't just limited to the training phase. It also extends to what we call inference, which is a process of using the trained model to generate responses or perform tasks.
Right. So it's about how quickly and efficiently the model can actually do its job once it's trained.
Exactly. And DeepSeek has developed some unique techniques to speed up this inference process as well.
Oh, like what?
One technique is called pre-filling.
Pre-filling.
Imagine having to fill out a form with lots of repetitive information. Pre-filling would be like having some of those fields already filled in for you.
Okay, so it's like saving you time and effort.
Exactly. And in the case of DeepSeek R1, they pre-compute and store certain parts of the model's output,
Okay,
which allows them to generate responses much faster.
that makes sense. It's like having a head start.
It is. And they've also optimized the decoding process.
Decoding.
That's basically the step where the model converts its internal representation into human-readable text. And they've done this by implementing these specialized kernels that are fine-tuned for the hardware.
So they're making the decoding process as fast and efficient as possible.
Exactly. They're squeezing every bit of performance out of the system.
It's amazing how they've considered every single aspect of the model's development with this focus on efficiency.
It really is a testament to their engineering expertise.
You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to circle back to. You talked about the auxiliary loss-free strategy.
Oh, yes. That's an important one.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? It sounded like it played a key role in their approach to efficient training.
It does. It all comes down to making sure that the workload is evenly distributed across those different experts in the model.
Okay, so if one expert is doing way more work than the others, that can slow things down.
Right. It can create a bottleneck.
Yeah,
And that's what we call routing collapse.
routing collapse.
And traditionally, the way to fix this is by adding something called an auxiliary loss function.
An auxiliary loss function.
Which basically penalizes the model when it uses experts unevenly.
I see. So it's trying to force the model to distribute the work more evenly?
Yeah. But what DeepSeek discovered is that this auxiliary loss can actually hurt the model's performance in the long run.
So it's a trade-off between efficiency and accuracy.
Exactly. And that's where the auxiliary loss-free strategy comes in.
Okay.
They've introduced this bias term for each expert,
A bias term.
which helps to distribute the workload more evenly, but without needing to rely on that auxiliary loss function.
So it's a more elegant solution.
It is, and it shows that they're really thinking outside the box.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the inner workings of DeepSeek R1. We've learned about its unique architecture, its efficient training methods, and how it manages to balance performance and accuracy. But I'm really excited to hear more about how DeepSeek R1 performs in the real world and what all of this means for businesses.
And that's exactly what we'll be discussing in the next segment. Stay tuned.
So we've spent this deep dive really getting into the nuts and bolts of DeepSeek R1.
Yeah, we've gone pretty deep, haven't we?
We have. But now I want to bring it back to our listeners, the business decision makers out there.
Right, the people who are actually going to be using this technology.
Exactly. So for them, what's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean for their businesses?
I think the most important thing to understand is that DeepSeek R1 is proof that you don't need massive infrastructure to do amazing things with AI.
So it's not just for the big tech companies anymore.
Not at all. It levels the playing field and opens up a whole new world of possibilities for businesses of all sizes.
Especially for those companies that might have been hesitant to invest in expensive hardware.
Exactly. DeepSeek R1 shows that you can get incredible results with a much smaller footprint.
And that's a game changer. I think it also points to a bigger shift that's happening in the AI industry.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about building bigger and bigger models anymore.
Right. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about building models that are more efficient, more focused, and better at reasoning.
And DeepSeek R1 is a prime example of that.
It really is.
Yeah.
And its performance on benchmarks is truly remarkable.
I was reading about that. It outperforms most of the other open source models out there.
It does. And in some tasks, it even rivals some of the leading closed source models.
Like GPT-4.
Yeah, even GPT-4. Especially when it comes to things like mathematics and code generation.
So this isn't just theoretical potential. We're talking about real-world results.
Absolutely. This is technology that can make a real difference for businesses right now.
So what kind of impact could DeepSeek R1 have on businesses on a practical level?
Well, think about it. DeepSeek R1 can handle those long contexts and this complex reasoning task.
Great, we talked about that.
And that opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Imagine automating complex data analysis, streamlining software development, even personalizing customer experiences in ways that weren't possible before.
So it's not just about saving money on infrastructure. It's about creating entirely new opportunities.
Exactly. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible with AI.
And the fact that DeepSeek is open sourcing its models is just incredible.
I know it's so important. It means that anyone can use this technology and contribute to its development.
It's democratizing AI in a way we've never seen before.
And that's going to lead to some really amazing things in the years to come.
I'm really excited to see where this all goes. So as we wrap up our deep dive into DeepSeek R1, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the future of AI is about more than just size. It's about efficiency, it's about reasoning, and it's about making this technology accessible to everyone.
And DeepSeek R1 is leading the way.
Absolutely. It's a model that's pushing the boundaries and showing us what's possible.
This has been an incredible deep dive, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. And for our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing the limits of what's possible with AI because the future is bright.
That's right. And until next time, keep diving deep.